Tonight, our first topic explores the life of Catherine the Great, the German-born princess who transformed herself into Russia's most powerful and controversial empress, from orchestrating a coup against her own husband to embracing Enlightenment philosophy while ruling with an iron fist. Catherine's story is one of sharp intellect, relentless ambition, scandalous affairs, and sweeping reform. But before we dive into deep take, a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if you enjoy our content, of course. And let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Sometimes our stories are a bit too interesting, but don't worry, we're working on a few boring ones, we promise. Now it's time to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some background noise, and settle in as we explore tonight's story together. She was born Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-West on May 2, 1729, in a quiet corner of the Holy Roman Empire. Her family was noblesse, but only just. They were minor German aristocrats, well-connected but far from powerful, living in modest comfort rather than grandeur. Her father was a Prussian officer. Her mother, ambitious and sharp-tongued, dreamed of elevating the family's status through clever marriage alliances. Even as a child, Sophie sensed this hunger for upward mobility, sensed it, and, in time, would learn to wield it like a weapon. She wasn't born to rule. No one in Germany whispered her name with dreams of destiny. Yet she was bright, intellectually curious, unusually poised and deeply obsessed with learning. She picked up languages with ease, devoured books, and studied the behaviors of court society with hawk-like intensity. Her world was small, but her mind was already wandering far beyond the cold halls of Zerbstay. When she was 14, everything changed. Empress Elizabeth of Russia, who had no children of her own, had chosen a nephew, Peter of Holstein-Gottorp, another German-born noble. But Peter needed a bride, and Elizabeth wanted one she could mold. Sophie was chosen. Overnight, her life shifted. Russia wasn't just another kingdom. It was an empire vast, strange, and destined to become her new home. The journey was long and cold. Sophie arrived in Russia as a foreigner, with no Russian, no Orthodox faith, and only a name connecting her to her old life. But she didn't hesitate. She converted to Orthodoxy and took the name Catherine Alexeyevna. She studied Russian day and night until she spoke it better than Peter himself. She adapted, reshaped herself, erased all signs of resistance. Her mother said she was too serious. Courtiers whispered that she was too quiet. But Catherine was studying everyone, especially her future husband. She saw in Peter a boy trapped in a man's body, childish and awkward, more fascinated by his toy soldiers than by diplomacy or affection. And in that cold realization, Catherine made her first silent vow. If Peter could inherit a throne, she could take it. She had arrived as a pawn in someone else's game, but already the pieces were shifting and Catherine was ready to play for the crown. The royal wedding was everything it needed to be grand, symbolic, politically strategic. But for Catherine, marked the beginning of a long, icy winter. Peter was no Prince Charming. Immature, emotionally stunted, and distant. He showed little interest in his bride. He spent his days marching toy soldiers across tabletops, rather than engaging with matters of the court or the heart. At times, he seemed more like a boy playing emperor than a man prepared to rule one of the world's greatest empires. Catherine, however, played her part with quiet precision. She smiled at the right moments. She dressed with elegance. She observed everything, especially what not to become. She quickly realized that if she was going to survive in the Russian court, she couldn't rely on her marriage. She had to rely on her mind. So she began to build a private life of thought and study. She read compulsively, hiding books under her pillow and staying up through the night. History, philosophy, the writings of Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire became her secret teachers. She wrote letters. She kept journals. She started shaping a private vision of what a ruler could be, someone who used power not for cruelty or indulgence, but for progress, justice, and reform. In a palace filled with whispers and intrigue, Catherine was quietly becoming dangerous. But danger worked both ways. The court was treacherous. Spies lurked in corridors. Alliances shifted overnight. Even Catherine's health faltered. Rumors swirled that Peter resented her so deeply that he withheld medicine during a near-fatal illness. She recovered, but she never forgot. So Catherine began cultivating her own allies. A few key nobles, military officers, even her personal physician. She learned what to say, what to withhold, and what to whisper behind closed doors. And when her marriage grew cold, she turned elsewhere for affection. Lovers entered her life discreetly, for now, with them came influence, protection, and, occasionally, love. But love was never her goal. Power was. Peter was still heir, but Catherine was no longer content to live in his shadow. She had tasted survival politics, the thrill of forbidden books, and the sharp edge of ambition. She wouldn't just be Empress by name, she would be Empress by will. When Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, Peter III took the throne. Catherine, now in her early 30s, had waited over a decade in the shadows, reading, learning, preparing. But the man she married was still erratic and unpopular. Within months, Peter alienated the Orthodox Church, insulted the nobility, and withdrew Russian troops from a victorious war simply to please Frederick the Great of Prussia. Russia's enemy, but Peter's idol. His loyalty to Prussia disgusted the military. His mocking of Russian customs enraged the court, and Catherine, she watched it all with quiet precision. She had already begun nurturing a secret network of loyalists, men like Gregory Orr, a charismatic military officer, and her lover with close ties to the Imperial Guard. Orlov wasn't just a romantic partner, he was her gateway to power. Behind palace walls, Catherine whispered her plans, she made promises, secured loyalty. She had no legal right to the throne, but she had something far more powerful, the confidence of those who carried swords. Then, on the morning of June 28, 1762, with Peter distracted, Catherine made her move. She rode to the Izmail regiment barracks, stood before the soldiers, and declared herself sovereign of Russia. They pledged loyalty on the spot. One by one, the guards, nobles, and even clergy followed. She rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, commanding. The people did not revolt. They welcomed her. Peter fled. Days later, he was forced to abdicate, and not long after he was dead, under suspicious circumstances, likely by Catherine's allies. She never admitted to ordering it. She never denied benefiting from it. When asked, she simply said, he was no longer needed. It had been a nearly bloodless coup. No uprising, no civil war. Just a perfectly executed shift in power. Catherine had done the unthinkable. A foreign-born woman had seized the Russian throne without majority support and without fear. Her rule was official. Now came the harder part, proving she deserved it. Catherine understood what many rulers didn't. Power wasn't just about bloodlines or armies, it was about image. Once the crown was hers, she didn't rest. She transformed. From a usurper, she became a reformer. From a woman of whispers, she became a philosopher on the throne. She exchanged letters with Voltaire, Diderot, and other Enlightenment thinkers. To them, she wasn't just a monarch, she was proof that ideas could shape empires. She invited scholars to court, funded writers, and praised reason and educational, while ruling with unmatched control. But Enlightenment ideals didn't always fit neatly into Russian reality. Russia was still a feudal society. Nobles owned vast land. Peasants were bound by serfdom, living in poverty and oppression. Catherine dreamed of changing this. She wanted to reform the legal system, expand education, and clean up corruption. In 1767, she created a commission to draft a new legal code, fair, rational, humane. She even wrote the Nakas, or instruction, herself, an Enlightenment-inspired manifesto that condemned torture, promoted education, and championed equality before the law. European thinkers hailed it as visionary, but at home the commission failed. Nobles refused to give up power. Clergy pushed back against secularism. And Catherine, always the pragmatist, stepped back. She wouldn't risk civil war for idealism. Still, some reforms survived. She expanded schools, especially for girls. She founded the Smolny Institute, Russia's first state-funded school for women. She built theaters, libraries, museums. St. Petersburg became a hub of culture and sophistication. But her enlightenment was a balancing act. She had to keep the nobles loyal, the peasants quiet, and the philosophers impressed. She walked a tightrope between ideals and survival, and behind the silks and salons, behind the letters to Voltaire and progressive speeches, Catherine ruled with iron discipline. But no matter how calculated she was, Catherine could never escape the world's obsession with her private life. In the glittering halls of court, whispers spread faster than truth. Her lovers became legend. Her first great love after the coup, Gregory Orr, helped bring her to power. but their bond faded. Orlov became erratic. Catherine, always rational, moved on. What followed was a string of relationships, not reckless affairs, strategic partnerships. Her lovers were often brilliant men, administrators, generals, thinkers. Each one served a loyalty, insight, or strength, but one stood apart. Gregory Potemkin. Potemkin wasn't just a favorite, he was a visionary, passionate, daring, brilliant. Their romantic love may have faded, but their political bond lasted for life. Potemkin helped secure Crimea, expand Russia's borders, and shape its foreign policy. Some believe they secretly married, though no proof survives, but their letters remain witty, warm, full of admiration and mutual respect. Still, gossip followed Catherine everywhere. Foreign pamphlets painted her as immoral, dangerous, even perverse. One absurd rumor claimed she died attempting to bed a horse. Pure, misogynistic slander. Catherine never responded. She didn't need to. Her reign spoke louder than any whisper. She had seized power, held it, and governed an empire with unmatched efficiency. Yes, she loved, but never foolishly. To her, love was part of politics. Tarts could be as strategic as armies. She ruled with vision, but she expanded her empire with precision. She turned south toward the weakening Ottoman Empire. Crimea was the key. Warm water ports, trade power. By 1783, Russia had annexed it thanks in part to Potemkin. Next, she looked west. Poland, fractured and vulnerable. Poland became her next target. In 3 separate partitions, Catherine and her allies sliced the kingdom apart. By 1795, Poland ceased to exist. It was cold, calculated, and effective. Catherine's empire had grown by over 200,000 square miles, but expansion brought challenges, unrest, resistance, diversity. Catherine met it with reform, reorganizing provinces, building schools, strengthening governance. She presented conquest as civilization's gift, not imperialism, to allies. She was a statist woman. To enemies, an imperial predator. To his rarer, a woman who expanded an empire through strategy, not chaos. As Catherine aged, her fire never dimmed. She governed into her 60s, reading reports, drafting reforms, holding court. But the world was shifting. The French Revolution erupted in 1789. Kings fell. Crowds demanded liberty. To Catherine, once a champion of enlightenment, it was terrifying. She banned revolutionary texts, tightened censorship. Her court became suspicious and cautious. Her enlightenment had an expiration date, and personally, she grew more isolated. Potemkin died in 1791. Younger lovers followed. Royal, charming, but rarely brilliant. She distrusted her son, Paul, impulsive, emotional, unstable. Privately, she considered bypassing him for her grandson, Alexander. She never got the chance. In November 1796, Catherine suffered a massive stroke. She never regained consciousness. She died quietly, with unfinished reforms on her desk and unspoken plans in her heart. Paul became Tsar. He reversed her policies. He buried her beside Peter, the man she overthrew. In death, they were united in stone, if never in life. The court mourned. Europe paused. Catherine the Great had ruled for 34 years. She left behind a larger, stronger empire and a legacy still debated centuries later. She was never meant to rule. She wasn't Russian. She wasn't born into a throne. But through intellect, vision, and ruthless determination, Catherine the Great became exactly what history remembers her as, an empress by will. She was one of the longest-reigning monarchs in Russian history, and her legacy, it's complex, full of contradictions that history is still trying to unravel. Catherine spoke the language of the Enlightenment. She wrote about justice, reason, and reform. She engaged with the greatest minds of her era and tried to inject their ideals into one of the most autocratic empires in the world. But when those ideals threatened her power, she suppressed them. She dreamed of freeing the serfs, then expanded serfdom. She spoke of equality while ruling with absolute authority. And yet, her impact is undeniable. She modernized Russia's administration, making it more efficient, centralized, and capable. She brought schools, hospitals, and the arts to cities that had once known little more than military parades and church rituals. Under her leadership, Russia became not just bigger, but stronger, wealthier, and more respected on the world stage. She ruled in a man's world and beat men at their own game. Her court was filled with powerful advisors and lovers. But Catherine was always in control. Every relationship, every policy, every letter was part of a broader vision. She turned St. Petersburg into a beacon of European culture. She expanded the empire's borders beyond imagination, and she left behind libraries, statues, and institutions that carried her name long after her death. But maybe Catherine's greatest legacy wasn't in territory or legislation. Maybe it was in possibility. She proved a woman could lead an empire, that charisma, intellect, and sheer willpower could elevate a minor princess into a world-shaping sovereign. She shattered expectations, not with rebellion, but with refinement, not with noise, but with calculation. To some, she remains a symbol of tyranny. To others, the goddess of reason. But to history, she is something more than myth. She is realer, flawed, brilliant, relentless human being who ruled for over 3 decades and left her fingerprints on an entire. Catherine the Great didn't just reign, she rewrote the script for what any ruler could be. Long before it was a city, El Dorado was a man, a king, they said, covered head to toe in fine gold dust, standing on a raft, floating in the middle of a sacred lake, surrounded by priests and nobles. As the sun rose, he tossed emeralds, gold, and other offerings into the water, tributes to the gods. It was a ceremony, a legend, a whisper in the wind. The indigenous Muisca people of what is now Colombia called El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man. But when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the early 1500s, they misunderstood. They heard El Dorado and didn't think of a ritual or a man. They imagined a place, a golden kingdom, hidden in the mountains, untouched by war, glittering with treasure. And just like that, El Dorado transformed from a man to a city, then to a kingdom, then to an empire. The name came to mean more than gold. It meant paradise, salvation, a place where every desire could be fulfilled. And for the Spaniards, starving, desperate, thousands of miles from home, it was irresistible. The jungles of South America came alive with rumor. Somewhere deep in the green unknown, a city of gold waited. The native peoples spoke carefully, sometimes trying to mislead, sometimes trying to survive. They mentioned far-off lands, shimmering rivers, and strange objects. The conquistadors took every word as a clue. El Dorado wasn't just a myth, it became a fever around campfires and in letters back home. The story grew. Soldiers who hadn't even left Spain believed it. Poets romanticized it. Monarchs funded expeditions for it. It no longer mattered if it existed. What mattered was the belief that it might. And belief in the age of conquest was all you needed. This golden illusion would drive some men to greatness and others to madness. It would become one of the most enduring legends in the history of exploration. A promise just out of reach. Always deeper in the jungle, always beyond the next ridge. El Dorado wasn't just a story anymore. It was a compass, pointing to nowhere, and still they followed it. In 1541, a brutal expedition left Quito, led by Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of the infamous Francisco Pizarro, who conquered the Inca Empire. Gonzalo had heard the rumors: cinnamon forests, lands of gold, and a golden city called El Dorado, just beyond the Andes. He was determined to find it no matter the cost. He brought with him over 300 Spanish soldiers, hundreds of native porters, a few dozen horses, and a dream made of gold and desperation. But the jungle was no dream. It was a living nightmare. Rain fell for weeks. Rivers swelled, drowning supplies. Insects devoured skin. Men collapsed from exhaustion, disease, and starvation. As weeks turned into months, the expedition fell apart. Food ran out. Morale crumbled. The Spanish, trapped in heavy armor, became paranoid and weak. Pizarro, desperate, sent a smaller party ahead to scout for food and a way forward. That group was led by a lesser-known noble, Francisco de Orellana. He would soon make history by accident. Orellana's group floated downriver, deeper into unknown territory. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually, he realized he couldn't go back upstream. There was only one path forward, with a handful of men and a makeshift brigantine. Orellana continued down what would become known as the Amazon River. He passed through vast forests and encountered advanced indigenous civilizations. He claimed to have seen grand cities, organized societies, and even tribes of warrior women. These tales would fuel the El Dorado legend for centuries. Eventually, Orellana reached the Atlantic Ocean, becoming the first European to navigate the full Amazon. But he found no gold, no city, just a myth now stretched across a continent. Back in the Andes, Gonzalo Pizarro's expedition was in ruins. Most men died. The survivors crawled back to keep starving, but the damage was done. The jungle had claimed its first real blood. In the name of El Dorado. And the myth, it was just beginning. By the mid-1500s, the Spanish obsession shifted from the jungle to a single place, Lake Guatavita, a perfect circular lake in Colombia's highland, shimmering and mysterious. The Muisca had long performed rituals there. One, in particular, captured European imagination: a gold-covered chieftain sailing to the lake's center, tossing emeralds and gold into the water as offerings to the gods. To the Spanish, it wasn't religion, it was a volta. In 1536, Conquistador Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada arrived and recovered a few gold trinkets, just enough to spark obsession. In 1580, entrepreneur Antonio de Sepulveda tried to drain the lake. He dug a channel through the mountainside. Water flowed out, mud rose, some gold appeared, but then the sides collapsed. Many laborers died. The treasure, still hidden, but the effect was permanent. Lake Guatavita wasn't just a site, it became sacred to the El Dorado myth, a place of hope, of ritual, of unfulfilled promise. Even centuries later, explorers came armed with sonar, scuba gear, even dynamite. But the lake held its silence. Like the myth, it fueled, promised everything and delivered only echoes. By the late 1500s, El Dorado fever had crossed the Atlantic. Now the English wanted it, no one more so than Sir Walter Raleigh, poet, soldier, favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. In 1595, he sailed to Guyana, chasing Spanish rumors and native tales. He returned with grand claims: a land rich with gold, a powerful emperor, a city just out of reach. He published the discovery of the large, rich, and beautiful empire of Guyana. It had no proof, but just enough detail to ignite England's imagination. Queen Elizabeth was intrigued. The public was enthralled. Raleigh became a legend. But time passed. Elizabeth died. Raleigh lost favor and freedom. Imprisoned in the Tower of London, he dreamed still of El Dorado. In 1617, he was given one last chance, another expedition, but it failed. His men attacked a Spanish post, violating a fragile peace. His son Wat was killed. Raleigh returned home. Defeated, he was executed in 1680. Dreams shattered by the myth he helped shape. As centuries passed, El Dorado refused to die. With each failed expedition, the legend grew stronger, a mirage on the horizon, a treasure just beyond the next river bend. Not a place, not a person, but a promise, a symbol of hope, greed, ambition, and delusion. The Golden City may never have existed, but in chasing it, men revealed the truths of their own desires. El Dorado was never real, but the pursuit always was. It was chased relentlessly. The uncharted, unforgiving, became both canvas and executioner. Countless men plunged into its emerald depths, convinced that gold waited just beyond the next ridge, the next river, the next breathless day. They came from everywhere: Portuguese fortune-seekers, German adventurers, Dutch traders, Jesuit missionaries. Each carried weapons, stories, and dreams. Few returned. Fewer still returned. Same. The Amazon rainforest, spanning millions of square kilometers, was one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Canopies so thick they blocked out the sun. Rivers that shifted direction without warning. Venomous insects and snakes hidden in plain sight. Starvation claimed some. Disease claimed others. And those who managed to push deeper faced an even more formidable threat. Indigenous tribes, fiercely protective of their ancestral lands, resistant, organized, and often deadly. Time and again, the same pattern emerged: a promising lead, a well-funded expedition, weeks of hardship, then silence. Many were never seen again, and still, the belief persisted. The myth evolved. El Dorado was no longer a single city, it became a floating dream. To some, it lay hidden in the Andes, to others deep in the jungle's belly. Some imagined it in caves, others in lakes. It changed with every explorer's hope, and that's what made it dangerous. The jungle didn't need traps, it didn't need armies, it only needed time. Men wandered deeper and deeper, guided by hope and misdirection, until exhaustion broke them. Some went mad, others turned on each other. The line between explorer and victim blurred until it was erased. Even when nothing was found, survivors still spoke of signs, glimpses of golden idols, distant lights, strange voices echoing through the trees at night. Their minds, half starved and half hallucinating, became compasses spinning wildly in all directions. El Dorado had become a psychological labyrinth, a promise of paradise that demanded everything in return. The jungle wasn't guarding a city of gold, it was guarding a story, and in that story, hope itself became a trap. For centuries, the myth of El Dorado was dismissed as fantasy, an illusion born from greed, misunderstanding, and European arrogance. But in recent decades, something remarkable has emerged, evidence that, just maybe, El Dorado wasn't entirely a lie. Not a city of golden walls, not streets paved in treasure, but signs of vast advanced civilizations that once thrived in the very regions conquistadors once called empty. Deep in the Amazon, archaeologists and scientists have uncovered remnants of lost cities, agricultural systems, and extensive road networks buried under centuries of jungle. In Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru, satellite imagery and ground surveys have revealed geometric mounds. Moat towns, intricate irrigation canals. These weren't tribal encampments, they were organized societies, some likely home to tens of thousands of people. And then, there's the soil. Scattered throughout the Amazon is a mysterious black earth called terra, enriched with charcoal, bone, and organic compost. It wasn't natural, it was engineered, created by ancient Amazonians to make poor soil abundantly fertile. It suggests a civilization that understood its environment deeply, intelligently, and sustainably. Could it be that when early explorers spoke of great cities in the jungle, they were witnessing the last flickers of a dying world? A civilization, ravaged by European disease before it could ever be truly understood. Many now believe so. Even Francisco de Orellana was Amazon journey was long dismissed as exaggerated, as being evaluated. His tales of bustling cities and powerful tribes may have been true, just a version of the truth that Europe wasn't ready to believe. Perhaps El Dorado wasn't one golden city, but the reflection of many real ones, a patchwork of thriving cultures that dazzled outsiders, only to vanish under jungle and time. The legend, then, wasn't built from nothing, but from fragments, misunderstood and reshaped by conquest. The gold may have been symbolic, the grandeur amplified, but the roots of the story were always real. El Dorado may not have been a place on a map, it may have been a memory. As El Dorado spread through Europe, it didn't just live in stories, it was etched into maps. From the 16th to 18th centuries, cartographers, working from rumor instead of science, filled the blank spaces of South America with fantasy. The unknown was terrifying, but it was also a canvas. And nothing painted that canvas better than gold. On ancient parchment, the word El Dorado appears in bold, pinned to lakes, rivers, and mountains that never existed. Sometimes, it was near Lake Guatavita. Other times, it floated deep in the Amazon, or behind the Orinoco. Some maps showed entire empires, sun temples, golden cities, and fantastical beasts guarding the way. They weren't meant to deceive, not exactly. They were drawn to sell. Each map was a siren song to monarchs, to merchants, to mercenaries. They justified claims. They funded expeditions. They gave explorers something just real enough to chase. The absence of proof was the point. The less certain the location, the more powerful the fantasy. These maps made their way into royal courts. They were published in books, copied, embellished, reimagined, and even after El Dorado was discredited, some maps continued to circulate, because humans don't let go of hope. EASILYA, map is more than a tool, it's a promise, and these promises glittered, even today. They're collector's items, not for accuracy, but for the moment they captured. A moment when belief was stronger than evidence. El Dorado never needed to be real, it just needed to be drawn. Centuries passed, the jungle swallowed the bones, the rusted swords, the silent footprints of those who chased El Dorado, and still, the myth survived. It lives in books, in animated films, in documentaries, in bedtime stories. It became a symbol, not just a city or a man, but an idea. Even into the 19th and 20th centuries, explorers returned to South America, armed with compasses, rifles, and scientific curiosity. Alexander von Humboldt, one of the most respected scientists of his era, journeyed through South America in the early 1800s. He didn't believe in gold, but he searched for truth, and still, the jungle whispered stories. Later came Percy Fawcett, the British explorer whose obsession with a lost Amazonian city, called it Z, mirrored the old dreams of El Dorado. In 1925, he vanished into the jungle with his son, never to return. Some say he died. Others believe he found something and chose to stay. Even in the 21st century, the search isn't over. Archaeologists, now armed with satellites, LiDAR and drones, continue to uncover evidence of complex civilizations in the Amazon. No golden city, but new ruins, earthworks, and gridded settlements. Proof that the jungle once held life far richer than ever imagined. El Dorado still gleams not on the ground, but in the mind, because we never really needed proof. We needed the pursuit. El Dorado is no longer a city, it's a metaphor for ambition, for obsession. For the human hunger for what lies just beyond the horizon. We chase it in careers, in dreams, in relationships, and sometimes in jungles. It doesn't matter if it's real. What matters is that we keep walking toward it. In the end, El Dorado was never found. No golden walls, no emerald thrones, no palace in the sun. The jungle never opened its hands, and yet, the legacy of El Dorado outlasted the kingdoms that chased it, because the explorers never understood the real treasure. It wasn't gold, it was what the journey revealed about themselves, about civilization, about the stories we believe in. They found rivers no map had shown. Peoples whose knowledge rivaled any academy, languages, plants, and customs unknown to the Western world. Some, like Orellana, made accidental history. Others lost everything, their wealth, their minds, their lives. And yet they too are part of the legend, not for what they found, but for what they were willing to risk. El Dorado endures because it speaks to something deep inside us, the belief that there is always more to become, more to discover, more waiting just beyond the horizon. You see it in every venture, every impossible dream, every story of someone chasing something bigger than themselves. El Dorado was never a failure. It was a mirror. It reflects our ambition, our curiosity, and yes, our greed, that it shows how far we'll go for something beautiful, something meaningful, something that whispers just a little further. El Dorado isn't a lost city, it's a question, and each generation answers it in their own way. An ancient mound of ash, built from generations of burnt offerings, before a single race was run, before a discus flew through the air. Sacrifices were made, oxen were led to the altar, incense burned, hymns echoed through the sanctuary. The first Olympic Games at their core were not about glory, they were about devotion. Only Greek men were allowed to compete, only free citizens. They came not just as individuals, but as representatives of their Peleus city-states, like Athens, Corinth, Argos, and Sparta. Each athlete carried not only his own ambition, but the honor of his homeland, draped like a cloak on his back. There were no stands, no announcers, no global audience, but the air buzzed with something sacred. Olympia became a crossroads, a rare space where language, rivalry, and politics paused, if only for a few days. And, in that stillness, the Greeks remembered, they were one people, united under the gaze of the gods. From all corners of the Hellenic world, they came barefoot, bronzed, some walking for weeks. To compete was not just allowed, it was holy, a way to step closer to the divine, to test the human form as the gods intended. Strong, focused, unashamed. There were no gold medals, no silver, no bronze, only honor. No empire had demanded these games. No king decreed them. They rose from something deeper, something woven into the soul of Greek identity. In the shadow of temples, beneath the eyes of Zeus, the Olympic Games took their first breath, not as sport, but as ritual. In a land divided by rivalry and war, it was remarkable that every 4 years, the Greeks found a reason to stop fighting. That reason was Zeus. Before each Games, heralds were sent from Ilis, the region that governed Olympia, to announce the Acharia, the sacred truce. It was not a suggestion, it was a binding vow. For 1 month sometimes, 3 warfare ceased. No armies could march, no swords could be drawn. Even hostile borders opened, allowing athletes, priests, and spectators to travel freely. This truce wasn't about peace, it was about reverence for something higher than politics, for the gods. In theory, it allowed athletes from any polis, even bitter enemies, to journey to Olympia safely. In practice, it was a miracle of diplomacy. City-states that had clashed in battle one year could stand side by side on the track the next. Even Sparta, with all its pride and defiance, respected the truce for most of its early history. To violate it was to invite the wrath of Zeus. At Olympia, a massive bronze statue of Zeus stood with thunderbolt in hand, a silent reminder. The gods watched. But the truce wasn't just about safety, it was about unity. Greece was not a nation, it was a patchwork of fiercely dependent players, often at war. And yet, every 4 years, they gathered as one, bound by shared ritual. The truce was symbolic. It taught that in a world ruled by conflict, there could still be moments of order, of respect, of ritual. For a moment, Greek identity rose above rivalry, and as olive wreaths were prepared and athletes stepped into the arena, they did so under the quiet power of peace, not enforced by soldiers commanded by gods. There were no uniforms, no tunics, no armor. The athletes of ancient Greece competed naked fully and deliberately. To modern minds, perhaps shocking to the Greeks, it was reverent. The naked body was not something to hide, it was something to celebrate. Strength, symmetry, discipline, not just physical traits, virtues, reflections of the soul. The word gymnos means naked. From it, we get gymnasium, the place where one trained both body and mind. Athletes covered themselves in olive oil not for vanity, but to showcase form and reduce friction. They dusted themselves with powder to prevent slipping and highlight muscle definition. Here, in this sacred arena, the human form became art. But this nudity also carried a moral weight. To compete unclothed was to declare, I have nothing to hide. It was a gesture of transparency, of boldness, a body laid bare before the gods and the people. Sculptures from the time show this reverence. Idealized runners, discus throwers, wrestlers carved in marble, symbols of heroic virtue, frozen in time. Even the gods themselves, Pallo Heracles, was shown nude, because heroism was exposed. Women, of course, were excluded, not just from competition but even from watching. Married women were strictly forbidden. Legend says the penalty was death, being thrown from Mount Typaon. Public life, especially sacred athletic spaces, belonged to men. The games celebrated the ideal male form, both physically and philosophically. Only unmarried girls were occasionally allowed to observe. They had their own festival, the Heraean Games, honoring Hera, wife of Zeus. These races, run by young girls, were shorter and done clothed, in tunics that left one shoulder bare. Victors received olive wreaths, just like the men, but it was not the Olympics. The Olympics remained a sacred male ritual, tied to Zeus's strength and military virtue. To be an Olympic victor was to be a hero, a role women in that world could not assume. In the first Olympic Games, there were no second places. Only one man could win. There were no podiums, no medals, no consolation prizes. Excellence was singular. The prize, not gold, not wealth, but a simple, sacred olive wreath, cut from a holy tree near Zeus's temple. It had no value, but it carried eternal glory. To win at Olympia meant your name would be carved in history. Poets would write of you. Statues might rise in your image. Your polis could grant you lifetime rewards, meals, theater seats, even public office. But it wasn't about reward. It was about arete, a Greek concept of virtue, excellence, and fulfillment of purpose. To achieve arete was to live as the gods intended. Victory was not just personal, it was political. A win at Olympia brought glory to your city, to your people. The weight of that made victory essential and defeat devastating. There was no room for excuses, no second chances. The line between eternal fame and utter obscurity could be measured in a breath, a slip, a heartbeat. Losers were forgotten, but the victor, he stood apart, crowned in silence, wreath glinting in the sun. The Greeks believed such men were touched by the divine. The first Olympic Games in 776 BCE featured only one event, the Stadiona foot race, roughly 192 meters long. No shoes, no starting blocks. No false start penalties, just bare feet on packed earth, and silence before the signal. The first champion, a cook named Koroibos of Elis, a humble man immortalized simply because he ran fastest. Once, his prize, a crown of olive leaves, and a place in the eternal scroll of Olympic victors. Over time, the games grew. By the 7th century BCE, new races, the Dialosa double sprint, the Dolichos a long-distance run, then came wrestling, javelin, discus, and long jump, the brutal pentathlon. Only the most complete athlete could win. One of the most fearsome events. The pancration, a mix of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules, no biting, no eye gouging. Everything else allowed. Men emerged broken. Some didn't emerge at all, but winners became legends. Then came chariot races, chaotic, thunderous, and wildly dangerous. Drivers were often hired hands, but owners of the horses received the wreath. Status still mattered. Yet, even then, the heart of the games remained that first foot race, a single sprint, one event, one victor, one beginning. From that, a movement was born, one that transformed sport into ritual, honor, discipline, devotion. At Olympia, every race, every throw, every drop of sweat was worshipped. At the heart stood Zeus, ruler of Olympus, patron of the games. Before contests began, oxen were sacrificed, their ashes added to a towering altar built entirely from past offerings. Athletes swore an oath, in the temple of Zeus, hand on sacred flesh, to train honestly, to compete fairly, to bring no shame to the games. Cheating was sacrilege. Those who broke the vow faced fines, beatings, or banishment. Their names etched onto bronze statues of Zeus. Gallery of Shame. The Hellenodic begrudgers from Elis presided. They trained for 10 months before the games, wearing purple robes. They weren't just referees, they were priests of tradition. Inside Zeus's temple stood a statue over 40 feet tall, sculpted by Phidias of ivory and gold. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, seated, scepter in hand, Nike perched. On his palm Zeus watched it all. Every action was for him. The games were not merely athletic, they were divine. In the case of Caniska of Sparta, a wealthy woman who bred horses, the rules of the Olympic chariot races allowed her to become a champion. Because the crown was awarded to the owner of the horses, rather than the driver, Caniska technically became the first female Olympic victor. However, despite her historic win, she was never permitted to step foot in the stadium to witness her triumph. This exclusion of women from the Olympic Games was not merely custom. It was a mix of religious decree, societal structure, and cultural identity. Olympia hosted many things, but participation by women was not among them. In ancient Greece, winning at Olympia was more than a personal achievement. It was a potent form of political capital. An athlete's victory brought honor not only to himself, but to his polis, his home city-state. Every competitor was a living emblem of their city. Triumph at the Olympic Games was a symbol of physical superiority, disciplined training, and divine favor, all of which reflected the values and prowess of the society that raised him. Upon returning home, Olympic victors were received as heroes. City gates opened in celebration. Crowds lined the streets. Songs were sung in their honor. Their names might be carved in stone or immortalized by poets. One of the most renowned poets, Pindar, composed elaborate victory odes, rich in language and mythology, often commissioned by cities seeking to commemorate their champions. The celebration extended beyond applause. Victors were often granted land, money, tax exemptions, free meals for life, or public statues. In some cities, they were given prime seats in theaters or at civic events. Sometimes they were even elected to public office, not for their political skill, but for the physical excellence they had demonstrated. Wealthy elites also saw the Olympics as a means of social advancement. They funded training programs, sponsored athletes, or bred horses for the prestigious chariot races. Since the crown went to the owner rather than the charioteer, an Olympic win could elevate an aristocrat's legacy and influence, shaping how history remembered them. The Olympic arena also became a symbolic battleground for rival city-states. When cities like Athens and Sparta clashed politically or militarily, they also competed on the Olympic field. Victories were closely watched. Who trained harder? Who had more winners? Which way of life did the gods favor? Olympic success sent a message: we are the stronger people. Our values are superior. In this way, the Olympic Games functioned as a diplomatic stage, a peaceful battleground, where cities competed not with swords, but with strength and discipline. The humble olive wreath may have seemed simple, but it carried the weight of political prestige, cultural pride, and eternal legacy. For over 1,000 years, the ancient Olympic Games continued uninterrupted. Every 4 years, athletes, priests, poets, and spectators gathered in Olympia. They came not for riches, but for glory, devotion, and unity. But history is never static. In 393 CE, Christian Emperor Theodosius I banned the games. To him, they represented a pagan tradition, incompatible with Christianity's rise in the Roman world. Temples were closed, altars were dismantled, statues defaced. The sacred flame of Zeus was extinguished. The stadium fell silent. Time passed. Olympia crumbled, its structures buried under layers of earth. Nature reclaimed the grounds. The names of champions faded, known only to a few scholars who preserved them in ancient scrolls. And yet the idea endured. In the 19th century, as archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Olympia, interest revived. Could the Games return, not just as historical reenactment, but as a global celebration? In 1896, that vision came to life. The modern Olympic Games were born in Athens, reimagined by Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who believed that sport could unite the world in peace, just as it had once united the Greeks. Coubertin borrowed from the ancient model, the 4-year cycle. The torch, the athlete procession, even the ideal of arete excellence in body and spirit was revived. Today, the Olympic torch is still lit in Olympia, beside the ruins of Hera's temple. Using a parabolic mirror and the sun's rays, the flame is kindled and sent across countenance, a flame connecting past and present. Though the modern games are vast, commercial, and global, their heart beats with ancient rhythm of striving, of peace, of honoring the human spirit. The sacred fire was never truly extinguished. It was passed on, later described in vivid detail by ancient historians. The remains of the Colossus of Rhodes continued to stir awe. Greek geographer Strabo wrote of bronze fingers, longer than a man, hollow limbs the size of towers, and a shattered torso that still held the shape of a god. Even in ruin, the Colossus inspired reverence. It became a site of reflection, proof that even the greatest works could break. Unlike other wonders of the ancient world, the Colossus was not destroyed by war, hatred, or invasion. It was toppled by nature itself, an earthquake, impartial and unstoppable, a stark reminder of humanity's limits. Still, the Rhodians treated the remains with care. They did not melt them down or erase them. Instead, they left the statue's fragments where they fell, letting time wind and memory transform them into something sacred. The ancient world regarded its 7 wonders not just as marvels but as pilgrimages, and Rhodes, though its wonder lay in pieces, remained a sacred destination. Alongside the towering lighthouse of Alexandria and the hanging gardens of Babylon, the broken Colossus claimed its place. It was different, more somber, more human. Where other wonders dazzled with grandeur, the Colossus evoked quiet contemplation. It whispered of time's passage, of ambition and fragility, and of the strange beauty of collapse. It offered a truth, that perfection could not, that even fallen things can endure in memory, and sometimes the remnants speak louder than the whole. Visitors continued to come. They walked among the fragments. They traced edges of bronze with their fingers, and they imagined a day when Helios had looked out over the harbor radiant, unshaken. The wonder still existed. It had simply changed form. For over 8 centuries, the broken Colossus lay in Rhodes, weathered by time and admired by generations. But in 654 CE, Rhodes was invaded by an army of the Umayyad Caliphate, a rising Islamic power sweeping across the Mediterranean. The city fell, and with it, the last visible remnants of the Colossus were lost. According to Byzantine chroniclers, the invaders saw the statue's ruins not as sacred, but as resource. The bronze was melted down and sold to a Syrian merchant. Some accounts claim it took 900 camels to carry away the metal. Whether exaggerated or not, the point was clear. The Colossus was gone. No more limbs or ribs to touch. No more towering bones of a fallen god. The statue that once symbolized resistance and identity now existed only in words, but those words carried power. Writers preserved its place among the 7 wonders of the world. Artists and mapmakers reimagined it straddling the harbor, casting giant shadows. In the Renaissance, it was painted as a titan. Its memory endured. The irony is that we know so little of what it actually looked like. No blueprints survive. No statues or carvings remain. Everything we believe comes from echoes, written accounts, myths, and imagination. And perhaps that's what makes the Colossus eternal, because it was never just a statue. It was a dream cast in bronze, a vision of what humanity could build when courage, beauty, and purpose align. Though its body has vanished, its shadow stretches across time, that the Colossus of Rhodes no longer stands, but its meaning has never collapsed. More than 2,000 years later, it still inspires, not as rubble, but as a symbol. It wasn't just about size or engineering. It was about what people saw in it: strength through defiance, beauty through resilience, pride made visible, forged from the spoils of war. The Colossus began as a declaration that Rhodes, though small, could not be broken. Its people turned siege weapons into sculpture. What once threatened them became their triumph. That idea has outlived the statue itself. When France gifted the Statue of Liberty to the United States, it wasn't just diplomacy it echoed the Colossus. A figure by the harbor, a message of welcome, a monument to something greater than stone or steel. In modern times, many have dreamed of rebuilding the Colossus. Some envision it with solar panels honoring Helios in a sustainable future. Others imagine a wonder of glass and light, hovering above the sea. None have come to pass. But the dream remains, and that dream says everything. Because the Colossus of Rhodes represents more than history. It represents the kind of monument humanity longs to build, not to conquest, but to possibility. It reminds us that out of devastation, something radiant can rise, that even toppled, the spirit of a people endures. In every shattered empire, in every monument built after war, in every torch lifted at a harbor's edge, the Colossus still stands. Not in bronze, but in memory. Rhodes may be quiet now, but in the minds of those who remember, a god of bronze still watches the waves, and even broken, he shines.